Take a look at the device you're watching this on right now. Chances are it crossed an ocean to get to you. Welcome to this explainer, where we're unpacking one of the most massive and rapid transformations in the history of international trade. We're going to dive into a comprehensive assessment of maritime security frameworks, specifically focusing on how the industry scrambled to defend the global supply chain against modern, asymmetric threats. We're talking, of course, about the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code, or, as it's better known, the ISPS Code.
So, let's dive right into this colossal logistical nightmare. When you picture international shipping, you're looking at a wildly vast, mostly open system. We're talking about over 50,000 massive vessels, constantly crisscrossing the oceans, interfacing with thousands of sovereign ports, all completely optimized for the fast, uninterrupted flow of global trade. But here is the billion-dollar question. How do you instantly pivot a system built entirely on the freedom of the seas into a lockdown, hardened security network? Well, let's explore the catalyst that changed international shipping literally overnight.
Section 1. Genesis of the ISPS Code. To really grasp the solution here, we've got to look at the history. For most of the 20th century, international maritime law was basically obsessed with safety, not proactive security. I mean, think back to the Titanic in 1914. That disaster gave us solace, the Safety of Life at Sea Convention. And for decades, the whole focus was just making sure the ocean didn't destroy the ship, prioritizing structural integrity, lifeboats, fire safety. But then, the unthinkable happened. The tragic events of 9/11, followed closely by the 2002 terrorist bombing of the French oil tanker Limburg, completely shattered that illusion. Suddenly, the supply chain was exposed as incredibly vulnerable. Ships and ports could literally be weaponized. This sparked a frankly unprecedented legislative response from the International Maritime Organization. By December 2002, they adopted the ISPS Code, and by July 2004, it was fully enforced globally. In the world of international law, that is light speed.
So who actually has to play by these new rules? Well, the mandate immediately targeted the absolute most critical nodes of global trade. We're talking all passenger ships on international voyages, no matter their size. For cargo ships, the cutoff is 500 gross tonnage and up, which is basically any substantial commercial vessel out there. It also scoops up mobile offshore drilling units and, crucially, every single port facility that serves these ships. Now sure, there are a few exemptions: warships, primitive wooden ships, fishing vessels, they get a pass. But for the actual backbone of global commerce, compliance is absolutely mandatory. No way around it.
Moving on to Section 2, the two-part architecture.
Now, trying to enforce these rules across wildly different operations, from, say, a sprawling container hub in Singapore to a tiny ferry dock in Europe, is a massive headache. To solve this, the IMO baked the code right into SOLAS using a really unique, split legal architecture. Part A is the heavy hitter. It contains mandatory, binding statutory requirements. It literally forces shipping companies to run deep risk assessments, draft ironclad security plans, and establish rock-solid communication protocols. Honestly, if you fail Part A, your ship is legally unseaworthy, period. Then you have Part B. Originally, Part B was drafted as recommendatory, kind of like a set of best practices. But here's the kicker. In practice, a lot of individual nations like Norway and Germany looked at Part B and decided to strictly enforce those guidelines as hard national law anyway. It creates this incredibly rigorous overlapping global security net.
Section 3. MARSEC Threat Levels.
The real engine behind this whole proactive security culture is a tiered risk management matrix, and it runs on real-time intelligence. Let's start with MARSEC Level 1. This represents normal operating conditions. It's the baseline security posture for international shipping worldwide. At Level 1, there's no specific threat on the radar, but the minimum appropriate protective measures are always up and running. So routine access controls are in place, IDs are being checked, and standard cargo monitoring is humming along. Think of it like walking through standard airport security, no known threat, but the everyday shield is definitely up.
But what happens when intelligence flags a general threat? Maybe not specifically targeted, but definitely elevated. That's when we jump to MARSEC Level 2. The operational posture visibly tightens up here. You're going to see appropriate additional protective measures locked in for a specific time frame. We're talking increased patrol frequencies, highly restricted zones around the vessel and the dock, and some incredibly intense ID checks for anyone trying to get through. It's a noticeable shift in tension. And then finally, we hit MARSEC Level 3, which is genuinely exceptional. At this stage, an attack is probable or even imminent. The response is drastic, though it's usually meant to be short-term. Normal operations, they basically grind to a halt.
Cargo loading is often totally suspended, non-essential personnel are evacuated, and port facilities might just completely lock their gates. You'll also likely see direct tactical coordination with state security forces. To put it simply, global commerce hits the emergency brakes and tactical defense takes the wheel.
But, this dynamic system creates a really fascinating logistical puzzle. What actually happens when a vessel pulls up to a foreign dock, but the ship is operating at a totally different security level than the port itself? Because threat intelligence varies wildly by nation, this kind of mismatch happens all the time.
Well, the framework solves this little puzzle with something called the Declaration of Security, or DOS. If the levels are mismatched, or say a ship is visiting a non-ISPS compliant port, they have to execute this formal written agreement before a single crate is moved. It explicitly divides up the security responsibilities. The ship agrees, hey, we'll handle these measures, and the port says, great, we'll handle those. It ensures a perfectly seamless overlapping net of protection so that absolutely zero vulnerabilities exist during that critical ship-to-shore interface.
Moving on to Section 4, the triad of responsibility.
Of course, managing all these rules, threat levels, and declarations requires highly trained human beings. To pull this off in the real world, the code established what we can call the triad of responsibility. First, sitting ashore in the corporate office, you've got the company security officer, the CSO. They manage the broad policies and make sure the whole fleet is compliant. Second, out on the rolling ocean is the ship security officer, the SSO. They're handling the daily, physical security of the vessel and its crew. And finally, coordinating everything down on the dock is the Port Facility Security Officer, the PFSO. These three nodes are in constant communication, constantly coordinating to keep the global supply chain moving without a hitch.
But here is a really fascinating paradox. What happens if strict security protocols suddenly clash with immediate physical danger? Like, imagine a fire breaks out, but the security doors are locked down tight to prevent unauthorized access. Well, the answer is built right into the text of Part A. Despite this whole triad of security officers we just talked about, the ship's master, the captain, retains absolute overriding authority. If security measures ever compromise the immediate physical safety of the crew or the ship itself, the master's professional judgment definitively wins out. They can and absolutely must suspend security protocols to save lives, because at the end of the day, safety always outranks security.
Section 5. Enforcement and Ultimate Authority.
So, we've covered the rules and the people, but writing up an international code is one thing. How does the international community actually enforce over 50,000 heavily capitalistic, fast-moving ships to comply with these strict, frankly expensive measures? The answer is port state control. While a ship's flag state handles the initial paperwork and certification, it's port state control, the sovereign authority of whichever port the ship is visiting, that rigorously verifies compliance on the ground. They are basically the ultimate traffic cops of the ocean. When a vessel enters foreign waters, it is subject to intense, standardized inspections by these authorities. They are the true guarantors of the whole system.
And let me tell you, the teeth on this enforcement are incredibly sharp. If an inspector boards a ship and finds clear grounds of failure, maybe they spot an expired security certificate, where they realize the crew literally doesn't know how to run a basic security drill, that triggers a more detailed inspection. And severe breaches? They don't just result in a slap on the wrist or a fine. They legally render a vessel statutorily unseaworthy. The ship faces catastrophic economic consequences. We're talking massive operational restrictions, lengthy detentions, or even being outright denied entry into the port. And in the shipping business, a ship that can't enter a port is a ship that is bleeding money. That, right there, is exactly why compliance is so phenomenally high.
The ISPS Code was a monumental paradigm shift. It successfully took an industry entirely governed by the open freedom of the seas and engineered a physical shield that protects global trade every single minute of every single day. But as we look to the future, it leaves us with a pretty critical question. The ISPS Code absolutely mastered physical security, gates, guards, and patrols. But is the maritime industry truly prepared to adapt this incredible framework for the invisible, highly sophisticated cyber threats of the 21st century? That is the next great frontier for maritime security. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning how the world around you actually works.